project towards. So, number one, the ground reality is changing in Europe with heavy dependence on China because of this large trading partnership position. Number two, investments are not very high. European investments in China are very high, but Chinese investments in Europe are not very high. But this is changing, and Germany, which is the major country in Europe, it is also now receiving a lot of investment. But most important, the East European, Central European regions have actually the largest recipient from China, and China is involved in a lot of infrastructure projects in East Europe and Central Europe, which used to be controlled by the Soviets before 1991. And today it is part of the market economy extensively. And so China has been able to make inroads into Central Europe and East Europe. So much so they have established an organization called China, East and Central Europe plus China, CEEC plus China. Some 17 countries are part of it within Europe, along with China, and they have 9 summit meetings so far. The last one was held last year in Beijing, but all across the East Europe, Central Europe, they have been able to establish. So technically, that doesn't really, matter for many people, many countries. But the problem here is China is led by a communist party, and European Union also has what Dr. Sinha has mentioned, the normative practices. They have a constitutional. Europe, after all, is also the origins of Renaissance, right, and Reformation. So they have these rights, human rights, and other things. Now, this became a sensitive matter between China and EU. First was during the Tiananmen Square incident. Many of you may have heard about this in 1989. About 3,000 to 4,000 students were killed in this by China moving the tanks on them, or by other means. They were killed, and European Union passed the arms embargo. So previously, China used to get a lot of technologies from the US. For example, the French Super Frelon, which is one of the best helicopters, armed helicopters. The French have given license manufacturing agreement for the Chinese. Likewise, there are several other arms that Italy had given to China in terms of the ship engines, or Germany had given a lot of other military technologies, and so on and so forth. So British have given the Rolls-Royce space jet engines in 1976 to China as a licensed manufacturing agreement. So high technology has been transferred to China, but China is a different animal, right? Because it is controlled by the Communist Party. So in 1989, much of the European technology is received from the US or Canada or other allies within the NATO. Now, these technologies have been barred from entering into China. So that is what we call arms embargo imposed in 1989. That continues, but still China was able to get something. So please go to SIPRI, Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, SIPRI database. You can, in 1 second, you can download, say, 1950 to 2022 arms transfer from X to Y country, or the kind of equipment that they have transferred, etc. So this is a good database, SIPRI database on arms transfer or on the value of the arms that has been sold to the different countries between A and B, or A, B, C, D in terms of multiple partners, trading partners. So European Union countries have banned the arms sales to China. But China was still able to get some through hook or crook in the European market. Because even though European Union is united, there are a lot of fissures here because they can also sell these arms as the CIPRI database suggests. Even today, they keep selling a lot of these small systems. If not the whole platform, small systems can also be transferred, as many European countries have done. So as a result, the Chinese were able to upgrade their military technology or other technologies. So this is one glaring problem between Europe and China, despite the arms embargo. The second is, since Europe is the place for renaissance and reformation, there is the human rights related issue, there is the norm building. For example, there is the right to responsibility, right to attack, right to intervene. This has been a norm that European Union countries have passed in the United Nations. So if there is any human atrocities created somewhere on earth, they keep raising these issues, such as those that are happening in Ukraine right now. These were raised, and as you know, 140 countries in the General Assembly had opposed the Russian actions in Ukraine because of the impact on civilians, women, children. There are an estimated 12 million people who have migrated from Ukraine to Poland, Hungary, Romania, and other countries. So there has been a European Union insisting that countries should observe certain global norms, including in the human rights or in other areas. This is one area. The other area, the third area, is in terms of the climate change proposals. As you know, in Copenhagen in 2009, there was a decision taken that all countries should reduce the emissions. So there is a certain cap that has been announced, 18% reduction in the emissions. Globally, we have a lot of emissions coming in because of the manufacturing sector, which is generally highly polluting, but also automobile sector, which generates something like 28% of global emissions, or other sectors. They have now been asked to reduce the emissions. And Copenhagen took the lead in this in 2009. And gradually, every country, there was a meeting in Durban, in South Africa, then Lima in Peru, and then in Paris, finally in 2015, December. So every country today has to declare that they have done ABCD in order to reduce the emissions. For example, green budgets. For example, how we have reduced the emissions. So shutting down thermal power stations, for example, is one effort. Or Delhi Metro is one effort in order to reduce the emissions. Because if you don't have the Delhi Metro, then you have all these transportation, emissions are increasing through transportation. So, so every nation today has to declare that they have done ABCD, and they have to go to Glasgow, for instance. They have gone late last year, and stated we have done ABCD in order to observe the emission-related issues, restrictions. So, as a result of this, the European Union today is insisting every country, including China, to roll back. Why only China? Well, of course, all countries, but why emphasizing on China? Because China is the second largest polluter in the world. China is the largest in terms of the manufacturing of goods and high-tech manufacturing. Previously, Germany was the largest in terms of high-tech manufacturing. Today, China had overtaken the position. Japan used to be the second largest economy. Today, China is the second largest economy. They have $17 trillion of output. GDP, gross domestic product. But they also become the highest in terms of the pollution. So as a result, the European Union countries or other countries actually have been insisting that everyone, so nationally driven programs to reduce the emissions have been made, and every country had announced some steps. Green budgets, for example, of solar panels. For instance, India is the leader now in the International Solar Alliance. So all across the buildings, we are putting up the solar panels in order to reduce the consumption on the coal and other forms of polluting industries. So China also did this, but China has to do more in terms of this. So that is where the European Union has been insisting that China do more in terms of the pollution-related aspects. Human rights in Xinjiang. There is the northwestern province of Xinjiang, where a majority of the people used to be from Turkey back in 14th, 15th centuries. So most of them, their religion is Islamic. These are Uyghurs, and they migrated from Turkey way back some 6, 7 centuries before. So 6 years ago, a United Nations Human Rights panel suggested that China has been incarcerating over 1 million Uyghurs in internment camps. So these camps would be very close with high surveillance. A QR code is posted on the entrance to any house so that it is linked up to the space and identified. So supposing if you're angry and this facial recognition can read that you are angry or you are happy or you are indifferent or probably you're planning to inflict violence on somebody else. So this software with those QR codes can pick up your emotions. And once they pick up these, the police would come and bump you off to the internet camps. So that is the kind of technology China has used. And drone technology and everything else is used in this in order to identify you and put you in jail or in camps or whatever. You can't wear a beard. You can't name your son as a Muhammad, as is generally the practice in Islamic societies. So the European Union then sanctioned the Xinjiang Communist Party officials. China retaliated and China sanctioned European Union Parliament members. So you can imagine the Parliament, a few Parliament members were sanctioned that they cannot go to China or they cannot, travel ban and others. There is an institute in Germany called MERICS, MERICS. That was also banned. It's a very professional institute. I want you to watch the MERICS because very powerful graphics. Generally, academic discourse is very boring, but MERICS has a very powerful, PPT presentations, and please watch those MERICS. They cover all subjects, but they also focus on China, and that is where the ban on MERICS came in. So MERICS has been banned from entering into China or dealing with China or conducting research collaboration with China. Then there is a scholar by name Adrian Zenz, Z-E-N-Z. So he was also banned. So please check on Google Adrian Zenz, Z-E-N-Z, Z-E-N-Z. So he has been banned because he came out with reports on the Uyghurs, and he suggested that the campaign against the Uyghurs has been going on in a very concerted manner, and he had been able to dig out information President Xi Jinping's speeches in relation to Xinjiang or Uyghurs, etc. And he suggests here we should follow a very strike hard policy. Strike hard, this is quote unquote. So which means if there is a demonstration, they should strike hard on the Uyghurs. Many mosques have been demolished and they were not allowed to pray on Fridays. And various other restrictions have been imposed. So Adrian Zenz documented all of these and he had put it up in the public domain. So as a result, he and various other European scholars have been banned from going to China. He's an academic. You can follow his Twitter account to see the kind of documents that he brings out. But most important, China doesn't distinguish between academic and policy related and so on. So there is a severe backlash from China on these. So totally about 18 people have been banned, including parliament members, in this case of the sanctions. And China has also been restricting a lot of other. In the meanwhile, one of the European Union members is Lithuania. You may have heard about a small country. Lithuania decided to change the name of Taipei Center. In Delhi, you have a Taipei Economic and Culture Center. We don't have diplomatic relations with Taiwan, but we have a Taipei Economic and Culture Center. So they changed the name of this to Taiwan Center, simply put as Taiwan Center. So China became very angry because China says Taiwan belongs to them. And as you may have seen recently, there has been a lot of hue and cry in Taiwan Strait crisis. China launched missiles across the Taiwan Straits. You may have seen those TV coverage and others. They have identified 6 areas close to Taiwan and blockaded all those areas. Now, Lithuania announced the setting up of a Taiwanese office. They have not established diplomatic relations with Taiwan, but they established an office for economic, cultural, and other interactions. For example, somebody in Lithuania wants to study in Taiwan or vice versa. You need a visa, right? You need something to, and some economic and other incentives for them, scholarships, likewise. So they established, and China became very angry and they shut down the Lithuanian embassy in Beijing. And they began putting restrictions on Lithuanian trade. But Lithuania is a member of the European Union. And European Union took this to the WTO by saying you're discriminating against me. So there is a case now in WTO, World Trade Organization, where the European Union is pressurizing China to remove those trade restrictions on Lithuania. European Union is quite solid on this, not so much on Brexit, but so much on because Lithuania is a member of the European Union. So Taiwan today is also becoming a major problematic in China-EU relations. Tibet, as you know, the Dalai Lama is 87 years old. And European Union Parliament passed some scholarships, some special status for the Tibetans. There are an estimated 70,000 Tibetans in India. So these Tibetans, they escape Chinese repression. They travel all across the Tibet and they land on the Kodari Road in Nepal. From there, they land in Kathmandu, and from Kathmandu, they fan off to Bhutan, Nepal, India. And that's where we get the Tibetan refugees in large numbers. So previously, we used to get about 5,000 Tibetan refugees. Now it's been reduced to 20, 30, and so on. So because of the stoppage of things. Now, European Union, because they believe in norms, religious freedom and others. So they began questioning, and several European leaders, for example, previously the French President Sarkozy met with the Dalai Lama. And China retaliated by demonstrating. So they encouraged demonstrators against the Carrefour. Carrefour is like Walmart or like, say, Reliance or whatever. So they kept demonstrating on the Carrefour, so much so the Carrefour sales have fallen down. Their shares in the stock markets have also fallen down. Angela Merkel, the former German chancellor, also met with the Dalai Lama. And so China retaliated against Germany as well. During the Beijing Olympics in 2008, the Czech capital hoisted the Tibetan flags because most of these town halls are generally civil society backed ones. So they can float any flag. You know, you can also have an Indian flag if any leader is visiting or any cultural event is happening. So they have flown the Tibetan flag, and China retaliated against the Czech Republic and other. So this has become a sensitive issue in China-EU relations broadly. Taiwan, Tibet, and then Hong Kong. In Hong Kong, last year, China passed the national security law. The national security law suggests that you cannot criticize the mainland China, that is the China which controls Hong Kong. But many expatriates from Europe, as you know, Hong Kong was a British colony till 1997 when it reverted back to China. So there are a lot of Gurkhas. Gurkhas now were given British citizenship or they have been naturalized. Likewise, there are many other European citizens in Hong Kong. All of them would attract the national security law provisions. So this has also been criticized by the EU Parliament for the kind of problems. Supposing if I'm in Hong Kong as an Indian, and even if I have not criticized China explicitly, or in India you can criticize anybody anytime. There is nobody who can not be identified, right? Because of our constitutional rights, etc. We can criticize. Of course, we also have a responsibility on what we criticize, not getting very personal, not getting, if it is above board, the Constitution, gives us the right to. But in China, even if I'm a foreigner, I will be arrested in Hong Kong, like any European would be arrested. So European Parliament had this issue, and they raised a lot of objections to this. Then there is also, you may have heard about the Indo-Pacific, right? So Germany today is sending ships and aircraft to the Indo-Pacific. The French have also been sending, because there are Francophone countries in Africa. And of course, they had also the previous colonies in Indochina, that is Laos, Cambodia, and other places. So France has also been sending signals that they are interested in the Indo-Pacific, which is a new idea that came about in 2017 during the Trump administration. So they began, several European countries began sending ships to South China Sea and other places, which China wants to grab. China says 90% of the 3.4 million square kilometers of South China Sea belongs to China. What is the reason? The reason was during the Ming Dynasty, they found some coins on South China Sea islands. South China Sea does not have natural islands. These are all reefs. And as the ocean tide increases, so many of these, almost up to here, up to the torso, the water can come up in many of these reefs. So there are no natural islands. And the Permanent Court of Arbitration in The Hague in July 2016 said that there are no natural islands. You cannot draw an EEZ, exclusive economic zone, the 200 nautical mile that every country gets, under the UNCLOS, United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. So the Hague Tribunal criticized the Chinese, saying that they want to own 90% of the 3 million square kilometers. Why is this important? Because $5 trillion worth of goods transit South China Sea. And 55% of Indian trade passes through South China Sea. $1 trillion out of 5 trillion is the share of the American trade. So Americans are interested. European Union countries, Japan, South Korea, other countries are interested because much of their trade is passing through the South China Sea. And China wants to grab the whole of, with the idea that somewhere in Ming Dynasty, they found some coins, which means I leave a coin here in this room. Some centuries later, I come back and say, Galgotia belongs to me. That is not international law, right? You cannot claim because you found some coins in this room. You cannot, that is not international law. International law says continuous physical occupation. I should be in this room continuously for centuries, or my descendants, in order to claim. But most important, I need to pay taxes for this, right? Which I don't. So it doesn't belong to me. But China says that the whole area belongs to them. So that created a lot of problem for the European countries, apart from, of course, other countries. So today, many European countries are sending ships. Britain had sent ships. There are 200 energy companies in South China Sea. Many of these are European or American energy companies, like British Shell Company, British Petroleum, Shell Company, or others. They all have been invested in this because countries have invited them to drill, and they have been drilling in these. And so that becomes a problematic for many of these drilling platforms. So this has also become a problematic in China-EU relations. COVID-19, we are all suffering. We suffered, our families suffered. COVID-19 originated in Wuhan, a city in the midst of China. It's the transportation hub. It is also the manufacturing hub. Now the French have given them the high safety laboratory, biological safety laboratory number 4. BSL-4 is the highest safety, which means no virus can go outside this room, outside that laboratory. But the investigation suggested the virus escaped from BSL-3 laboratory in Wuhan Institute of Virology. And so we all suffered last 2.5 years. Since November, December 2019 till now, we all suffered because of this. Millions of people were killed. We have 5 lakh people killed in India. China has not explained anything so far. The first wave of, before January 24, 2020 lockdown of Wuhan, 5 million people went abroad. 2 students from Wuhan went to Kunming. From Kunming took a flight to Kolkata. From Kolkata took a train to Kerala. They hailed from Kerala. And they infected the whole of Kerala. Kerala is the largest today in terms of infections. Second is Maharashtra. European travelers went to Rajasthan. 15 of them were infected. And from there, the whole of Rajasthan and other places were infected. This is 2020 January. That's how the whole thing spread across in India. In Mumbai, we had travelers coming from Iran, Europe, from other places, so they were infected. And so Maharashtra is the second largest in terms of infections. Now, 5 million people left before the lockdown in Wuhan. So many of them went to Lombardy in Italy. Why Lombardy? Lombardy has the leather technologies. They have the highest leather sophistication in the world. Leather technology sophistication. Many Chinese went to Italy and settled down in Italy. Many Italians want to have a siesta every day. So from 11 o'clock to 4 o'clock, they're all sleeping up. They just work for 4 or 5 hours in a day at the most. So the Chinese saw the opportunity here. Chinese work, if you give them a job, they will work for 20 hours. So they started working and they started replacing many Italians from their own businesses. And they now are part of the entire business community in Lombardy. They took over the leather industries, the textile industries, and others. So the first migration before the lockdown happened to Lombardy. From Lombardy, they went to Spain. So Italy and Spain were the major casualties during COVID-19. People just fell. The hospitals could not really sustain. The Europe was the worst in terms of the COVID casualties. And that's because of the Chinese migration. One Milan mayor said, hug a Chinese campaign. Hug a Chinese means that you go and hug a Chinese, meaning you invite a Chinese. They literally had a hug a Chinese campaign. So someone would go and hug a Chinese so that there is more tourism from China. Why tourism? 180 million people from China visited abroad. 180, 18 crore people in 1 year visited abroad. So you can imagine if we get at the most 10 lakh people to 20 lakh people in India as tourists, inbound tourists coming from abroad. They have 18 crore people going abroad. So any country which projects this can also earn a lot of tourism. I see in Golgata University there is a hospitality and tourism industry department.
Yes.
So one of the things probably in that course is how to attract tourists with infrastructure, with all that stuff. So what China did was to not export but encourage these. So Milan mayor in his campaign, and it came at the wrong time because hug a Chinese means many Chinese infected, and so Italy also infected. So actually that boomeranged on the Italians, this campaign, and Spain as well was one of the worst areas. So they began, of course, China also donated a lot of vaccines. Sinopharma is one vaccine they developed, but Brazilians found the vaccine is 54% effective, which means the other 50%, 46% is not effective. Unlike the two vaccines, major vaccines that we overall took, it is quite effective. None in this room is wearing a mask. It indicates to the effectiveness of this vaccine, right? We may be infected, but we probably will not see the last April kind of situation joining ICU side. So it's something like a common flu. So it really doesn't. So none of us are wearing any masks because we are confident Indian vaccines delivered, right? It created antibodies in our bodies. So it is, and we don't see last several months, none of us are infected, right? Or infected, but just have a headache or some such, which every year we get anyway because of the change in weather and other conditions. So, but Europe received a lot of vaccines and also masks and others. But Europe also complained about the low grade or low quality medical equipment that they supply, masks, vaccines, PPEs, personal protection equipment, or oxygen concentrators or others. Cuba sent nearly 2,000 to 3,000 nurses and doctors. They're pretty effective in Spain and Italy than compared with the Chinese vaccines. Cuba spent a lot of money on HRD, especially on health related, and they were really able to. A few things also became very controversial, such as the Confucius Institutes, like our Gandhi chair or Rabindranath Tagore chair. China also has these Confucius Institutes. So they have nearly 500 Confucius Institutes across the globe. What Confucius Institutes have is generally they want to have these young faculty members coming and teaching you the Mandarin language, Putonghua language. So they have this projection, 100 million people will be learning the Chinese language abroad. So they set up these 500 odd Confucius Institutes. A majority of them are in Europe and in Southeast Asia, but a lot of them in Europe. So they found out one Professor Sung Shi-ning, he was banned from entering the Shenzhen area because he started recruiting students in the intelligence agencies of China. So he was banned from, and Pennsylvania State University, Chicago University, other universities across the globe, including in India after Galwan incident, we shut down the Kolkata classrooms, Confucius classrooms, when we had that June 15, 2020 Galwan incident where 20 Indian soldiers were killed. We banned the Chinese classrooms. Likewise, European countries began now looking at the modalities of the Confucius Institutes. Why is this important? Because the number one students in Europe, the foreign students, come from China. If you look at Oxford University, Cambridge University, Sorbonne University, any other university in Europe, number one foreign students would be Chinese students because the per capita income has increased in China. Generally, the family, they have now been sending their children to many of the European universities. And so there is an influx of these Chinese. And today, many European countries also are suggesting if you are planning to visit Europe, then you have to pay $1 million as $1 million as part of the visa fees or residential fees or others. So this is one way of earning more money by the European countries. Canada has some $500,000. Likewise, many European countries are today putting up this much of money. If you want to come and study in Europe, you have to invest in real estate or in other places. Spend that kind of money in the. So which many Chinese students are doing because their per capita income levels have increased. Today, the Chinese per capita income is about $10,000. Indians is about $3,000. You can imagine 3 times higher than the Indian per capita income. Of course, in Europe, it is about $35,000. So it doesn't really match. So Europe, of course, had the Industrial Revolution, their material capabilities have increased over a period of time. And of course, they have a colonial background. As somebody said, Britain had taken away $45 trillion from India. The kind of colonial wealth that Europe possessed all across the Asia, Africa, South America. So the important thing here is many of these Confucius institutes now became problematic. They are under the scanner now for the kind of things that they do. And so this has become many of the teachers are party members. All of them generally are party members. And some universities found out they're also from the intelligence. So that created a lot of tension with the local communities, and this has been one of the friction points. Then there is a Chinese movie called Wolf Warrior. You must watch this movie. There are English subtitles. Wolf Warrior. So the movie ends with a slogan that wherever you go in the sense any Chinese go abroad, the motherland follows you. The motherland protects you. The Americans used to say this. Any American who is abroad will be protected by the American state. Israel also has a similar policy. Any Israel, even if you destroy an Israeli property like this laptop, you will attract the counterterrorism measures. They include even property. They include even not just the human being, but also property. So this Wolf Warrior movie ends with this slogan that the motherland follows you, protects you. And this is repeated. And Wolf Warrior movie had a sequel, Wolf Warrior 2, Wolf Warrior 3, and so on. And so this has generated a lot of public interest in this movie. And most important, the Chinese diplomacy started adopting Wolf Warrior diplomacy. Wolf Warrior diplomacy means that you have to exert yourself, you have to shout on others. But diplomacy is to convert other countries towards you, attract other countries towards you. Wolf Warrior diplomacy brought in a jarring note, and Chao Lijian, the current foreign ministry spokesperson, like our Arindam Bakshi, who is MEA spokesperson, but Chao Lijian started saying, first he said, the Wuhan virus came from the American biological labs. And then he deleted his tweet later on. He said, Americans have put this virus in Wuhan when there was the global sports campaign, World Sports Convention took place somewhere in October 2019. So he said the American sportspersons, they have carried the virus and infused it into the Wuhanese. And then, of course, he deleted that tweet. Later, he said the Australians, they have been doing a lot of atrocities in Afghanistan. So if you remember, there was a parliamentary committee in Australia which went into the Afghan operations, and they found some excesses by this, and they dismissed these Australian troops, that soldier who was operating in Afghanistan. Chao Lijian morphed the photograph of this Australian soldier and implicated him in, killing some commoners in Afghanistan. Again, he deleted his tweet, and later on, the Chinese embassy in France, the Chinese ambassador Liu Xiaoye in Paris, he criticized the parliament members in France. Generally, ambassador is not supposed to criticize, and basic duty of them is to attract others. But he started criticizing the French parliamentarians, and the Chinese embassy in France also identified some researchers like you, and said that so and so is very active on Xinjiang studies, Uyghur studies, and so they criticized these researchers. So this has resulted in the Wolf Warrior diplomacy. And Ambassador Liu Xiaoming in UK, there are a lot of scandals in parliamentary committees in UK, right? It's a traditional. We grew up with this Pamela Boards case, way back in 90s. There was a scandal in. So parliamentary scandals are quite reported in UK. And so these Chinese researchers began backing up some of the MPs in UK Parliament, and that became quite controversial because The parliamentary committee in UK was looking at the 5G. As you know, Huawei is the leader in 5G technologies, 5G telecommunication technologies across the globe. And UK has 3G, 4G, and 5G from Huawei company. And Huawei can listen to all the things that, so there is no secrecy in UK if you have the 5G. And that is the reason why this became a national security issue. So many European countries have 4G equipment coming from China, like the Huawei equipment or Chongqing, another telecommunication company. So NATO decided that China is a potential threat, national security threat to Europe. So this was the highest concern that the NATO expressed in 2019, and then subsequently later on. So they said China is a cooperator, but also a competitor. NATO focuses on the Soviet Union, right? It's not on China. But NATO today has mentioned China by name, which means then in the background of Russian military action on Ukraine, where Putin, when he went to war on Ukraine, he faced three basic issues. One, Ukraine has to be neutral. Ukraine should not join the NATO. NATO should not deploy ballistic missiles on Russian borders. So that is why we are taking military action on Ukraine. These are the three reasons why we went to war in Ukraine. Now, the NATO eastward expansion was mentioned by China as a threat to itself. So here, the EU-China relations are now becoming more animated with this provision in the 2019 declaration that China is a national security. So that's a very high concern that is part of the whole. China and EU had an investment treaty in 2020, which means they will have a kind of free flow of investments from each other. At the moment, the investments are not very high, but they want to increase the investments in all these areas, infrastructure and industries and other things. But the Bundestag in Germany has some parliamentary oversight committees. If the investment is coming from the foreign exchange administration of China, and China has $3.2 trillion of foreign exchanges. How much we have? We have about $600 billion. They have $3.2 trillion. So, but this is the government-owned foreign exchange. So this is also problematic for investments. So what do they do is, put up a company, lend money for this, and then they started, investing in our places. So Bundestag has, the German parliament has some overseeing committee which looks at where this investment has actually come from. And if it comes from the Chinese government-owned bonds, etc., then there are restrictions because China can use this to influence these countries in Europe, which is what it is trying to do in East Europe and Central Europe. So that is where the German parliament and the European Union have been insisting that it should be by a private company rather than by a state-owned bank or a state-owned foreign exchange related aspects. So the investment deal is today put on hold. It was not ratified. It was signed in 2020 December, but it was not ratified, which means there is now a certain freeze between China and EU. I recounted several aspects. Although there is cooperation, I mentioned the China becoming the largest trading partner. Nevertheless, this also indicates to the the kind of problems that China and the European Union are facing. I want to stop here so that we can have some discussion on some issues. Thank you.
So much.
Thank you, Professor Srikanth, for such an insightful talk. We appreciate you making time in your busy schedule to speak to our participants. We are grateful for the time and effort you took to share your thoughts and expertise. Your years of research, your depth of understanding of China-European Union relations, and your ability to present the domain in such an interesting way go a long way towards achieving academic excellence for undergrad students and research scholars alike. So before we move to the question and answer session, I will quickly sum up a few takeaways of the session. This session highlighted immense expansive role of developing China in political imagination of the world and the European Union in particular in the contemporary global market economies. The other key point that emerged out of this talk is contestation over the ideals, spaces, and values held by the two world powers, or to say struggle of mutually exclusive ideologies to establish their hegemonies. So with this, we are very well into the question and answer session, and I request our participants to come up with your questions or comments, queries. So let's start.
So we're talking about EU-China strategic relations. So my query is, as we know, political landscape in international system is changing rapidly for the last few years, with the USA kind of being a superpower bringing down now, and the EU being played out through soft politics or soft power. And China is now continuously becoming aggressive on different fronts. So what this has implications for India? How do we see this entire scenario here? And second, I read a book recently on why particular nations rise up. So just wanted to know that what do we consider China as a rising power or leading power, emerging power? I mean, on what basis, in spite of the fact that it is one of the biggest economic bloc, economic power, it is still not able to basically play out largely as a normative actor like the European Union. So I just wanted to know that. Do you have a question?
What are the lessons that India can learn from the Chinese aggressiveness? Or how does it benefit? How does it motivate? How does it respond to the Chinese aggressiveness? We did face the flag when 20 Indian soldiers were killed 2 years ago, 1.5 years ago. So that aggressiveness is real. We had, and those of you who remember what happened on June 15th night, the Chinese soldiers used barbed wire fencing wrapped onto a bat and then beat up the Indian soldiers. Barbed wire fencing, and they put up nails on the back and then they hit the Indian soldiers with this. I heard that the Indian soldiers carried trishul to beat up the Chinese soldiers. So what happened was actually barbaric. They used the Paleolithic period conflict using stones and not the way a sophisticated Indian army or Chinese army would fight.
Nature is changing. Look right.
Yeah. So there is a, but what it indicates is to the brutality. Despite all the talk, Prime Minister Modi met with Xi Jinping 2-3 months before that incident. Well, not that incident, but in October 2019, they met in Chennai Connect in Mahabalipuram temple. And before that, they met in Wuhan in 2018, before the virus came in. And so they met in Wuhan, they met for 10.5 hours totally. And in Chennai, they met for nearly 11 hours. That is, they are talking to each other personally alone, or they are talking to with the officials in place, or they are strolling, like you saw in Ahmedabad, they had across the Sabarmati river, they were having that Jula ride, right? With Xi Jinping in 2014 September. So now the highest level leaders are talking to each other and they are confabulating. Yet on ground, you saw the brutality. So it doesn't really match between the leaders and, but without the leaders, the army is not going to do what they did, right? The army generally follows strictly the civilian leadership's instructions. So you see this duality. One is the 10 hours, 11 hours, whatever discussion, and they both declared that this was a pretty good discussion they had had. But on the other hand, we saw the brutality on there. So this is the dichotomy in India-China relations. When it comes to conflict, there is the kind of violence that is inflicted. Of course, we had this 1962 war. We had other, memories. So these are all part of the dynamics between India and China. So one is at that level of aggressiveness. The second level is diplomatic or economic or others. For instance, in April last year, we were all suffering from the virus, and an oxygen concentrator is valued at roughly about 20,000. What China did was to sell it at 2 lakh rupees. 2 lakhs per oxygen concentrator. And we bought lakhs of these oxygen concentrators. So the trade ballooned to $125 billion. So Indian Consul General in Hong Kong said you inflated the price from 20,000 to 2 lakhs. This is not part of the WTO procedures. You have to be based on demand supply rather than on protected markets. Or so at the economic level, we saw also that aggressiveness. Diplomatic level, whenever the Dalai Lama or even whenever the Indian Prime Minister or Indian President visits Arunachal Pradesh, so they give a statement, they criticize, but whenever a Chinese leader visits Tibet or the Aksai Chin or other areas, we don't make any statement, meaning thereby that that aggressiveness is reflected in their subject-wise at the diplomatic level. There are also very many areas where this aggressiveness is displayed in the India-China relations. So this is one set of answer. The second set of answer is China's general aggressiveness across the globe. How does that impact on India? In this, I think for example, the wolf warrior diplomacy that I mentioned, it also sometimes hits us. But this is generally also an opportunity for us, because if China is painted negatively across the globe, we have to paint ourselves in a positive manner. For example, we said in the new education policy, Vishwa Guru, right? We want to be the Vishwaguru, not leadership, but want to be a teacher in the or in terms of learning from each other. So it is more of a soft power rather than hard power that we want that to be projected in future. So, so this is one. Chinese aggressiveness could also be an opportunity for us in the sense of how do we use that?
Many people will not accept it.
Yeah. So that is one way. On China's rise, in international relations, generally we have three categories. Are you a status quoist country? Are you a revisionist power? Are you a revolutionary power? A status quo power means that everything has to be status quo, so that there is smooth. Every day you get your quota of market products. You can go to the market, you buy things, no disturbances there, no demonstrations, no julus, nothing, and you come back home safely. There is law and order, there is predictability. Trade is happening on a normal course. So status quoist. Many countries today are status quoist because they say international law is fine. We will try to tweak a little bit here, tweak a little bit there, but overall law and order is fine. International law is also fine. We want to focus on our economic development, on our per capita income, on our industrialization, on our trade, so that is a status quoist power. The second is a revisionist power. A revisionist power is I have now become $17 trillion GDP. I'm not satisfied. So I'm not satisfied with this system. I want more. I want more powers. I want this, I want that. So revisionist power wants to revise the global law, global governance system, all for itself, sometimes for its allies as well. So China is seen hanging between status quo power and a revisionist power because they think that their time has arrived. They are 17 trillion. United States is 23 trillion. So not far away from the US, although US per capita is $45,000, Chinese is $10,000. There's a huge difference here. And US is technologically, silicon, the artificial intelligence, or other technologies have been highly sophisticated in US compared to China. China is catching up, of course. China today sees, I want more powers. China is already a member of the Security Council, right? So it wants to use more veto power because once you got, so what do you do when you have power? You will acquire, if you have more money, what do? You will acquire a Ferrari. For a Ferrari, you will bring a chowkidar for this. You will also have 100 bodyguards for you. The power keeps increasing and you start exerting on other countries, so China started exerting on Taiwan, on South China Sea, on Senkaku Islands with Japan, on India-China borders, on Vietnam, Philippines in the Southeast Asian region. So it started exerting. It became too strong now. So it started exerting. As I said, in Ming Dynasty, they found some coins. So now I want that. So one Chinese said Vladivostok belongs to China. Another said Hawaii belongs to China. I mean, these are crazy statements. These may not be real, but the fact that there is a thought process going on, a nationalist thought process going on. We want all of them to come to the Chinese mainland. So a revisionist state starts also tweaking many of the international laws. For instance, as I mentioned, the Hague Tribunal ruling on the South China Sea. They are not accepting the international law. They say 3 bags full for the UNCLOS, but not for the Hague Tribunal ruling on the same UNCLOS provisions, the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea provisions. So China today is in between the status quo power and revisionist power. It would criticize the European norms as being these rules being laid down during 16th century. The Westphalia Treaty, 1648. So it says that following Machiavelli, Locke, Hobbes, and others, it says that there is a longitude, latitude across each of these. Whatever happens within your country is your sovereignty, internal sovereignty. Whatever happens outside, you should be consulted. And so inside sovereignty, outside sovereignty, based on Westphalia. Of course, Europe has gone post-Westphalia with what Dr. Sinha mentioned, the Franco-German iron and steel cement agreement in 54, and then the European integration. So now they have no borders. The Schengen visa, for example, you can just travel across with, of course, like a toll gate. You probably exchange a few things, but you don't require a visa to go from one European country to the other. So Europe today has gone post-Westphalia, which means post-modern in a way. China is still at the modern level in terms of latitude, longitude, internal sovereignty, external sovereignty, non-interference policy, and others. But most important, they have become now revisionists in many areas. So this is what is a consequence of a rise of a country. There are 15 countries in the world from Roman Empire. Out of 15 countries, so Roman Empire started exerting itself. Roman Empire began expanding because they have now more cavalry, more money because of trade. So they started exerting, and so they overran many countries across. And so they have established the empire. Megasthenes came, Alexander came up to these areas in Indus River regions. And so that is how they built up this whole empire. So a rising country has either you have to defeat the existing hegemon, currently the Americans. Americans are the global hegemon. You either defeat militarily, like the British, the French, Americans did to Hitler in 1945. You defeat, and then later on you have new superpowers emerging like US and the Soviet Union. So you militarily participate, or in other words, violence as a means for replacing the existing hegemon is one option. So out of 15 countries in human history, 11 cases were by violent overthrow. Only 4 cases were peaceful transitions. So today, if China wants to be the superpower, they have to defeat the Americans by military force. It's a tall order right now, because even though China is the second largest economy, fighting means you have to bring in so many resources, human, technological, financial. Pentagon budget is $700 billion. Chinese defense budget is $220 billion. So there is no match here. Technology-wise, as the Americans indicated in the Gulf Wars, 91, 2003, or in Afghanistan, or in Kosovo, they have displayed firepower. By sitting in this room, they attacked Iraq. So that no contact war. So it is highly sophisticated. What they did in Iraq, in other places, is highly sophisticated. It's a different matter. They could not control Afghanistan. They could not control Iraq. That's a different matter. That's boots on the ground related matter. But the most important thing is here, those four countries who replaced the previous hegemon did it with non-violence or in a peaceful manner in history. So the option for China today, if it wants to be a revisionist power, it has to defeat the US militarily, and that is a tall order right now because of the superiority than the US. US also has the NATO, right, to back up. They also have Japan, they also have South Korea, they have also other Australia or other alliances in Indo-Pacific. So it is quite formidable adversary for China to defeat. So in terms of this revisionist thing, China is not able to clinch the matter by defeating the US. So this is the third is a revolutionary state. China used to say that they are a revolutionary state in 50s and 60s. And when China was denied a United Nations membership, Chou En-lai, the premier, said, we will set up a revolutionary United Nations. They didn't do anything of that sort because their only friend during the Cultural Revolution was Albania. Albanian leader Enver Hoxha, he went to Beijing once in 1966. He said, Albania and China have nearly 700 million people on Earth. Albania only had about 10 or 12 million people, and China had 600 million. But he said, we both are about 700. Albania today is nowhere in HRD indicators or power indicators or others. Albania was the only friend of China in 60s. Everybody boycotted China because it was following the revolutionary power idea. So these three categories are important for a country which is rising. And so
in my mind that after the Ukraine and Russia war, looking at the monopoly of the America and the actually not monopoly, the America is not credibility. But we were thinking that the surely the America will support because everyone in the media is studied about that surely Ukraine is doing or it is fighting with the Russia and the taking for further steps due to support of the America. But what is happening that when there is a fight coming and America didn't support it, didn't support so don't you feel that it is at the global level something that China and Russia they have already they have a good relationship between them. So surely they have got policy or something which can increase their power at the global level as compared to the America and reduce the credibility of the America. Can you please relate it to Ukraine and Russia? What will be now the next world scenario at the global level in terms of the power that Mahashakti, Mahapower, Shaktiya, we have been studied about that Russia and America and they have a connection China and the Russia with what is happening that the US at that time they have
What is your question?
Yes, they have not supported. So I'm just asking about the scenario in this.
that's a good observation. Thank you very much. It's also the current burning issue in global politics. So I think, so let me start with a few basics here. On February 24th, Russia invaded Ukraine and Donbass was announced as independent republics. Like Crimea in 2014, these were not annexed so far, but it is said that Donbass region, those two republics, are almost with the Russian control because these are mainly Russian dominated people in Donbass of Ukraine. So on February 24th, Russia never used the word war so far. They were only saying that we will we have concerns on Ukraine. So as I mentioned, those three things. Ukraine has to be neutral. Ukraine should not join the NATO membership, and NATO should not deploy ballistic missiles on the Russian borders. As you know, Ukraine is on the Russian borders. So these are the three conditions on which they went into conflict with Ukraine. That was on February 24th. Today is August 24th. They have not been able to succeed. Russians were not able to succeed so far. The war is still continuing. War in the sense they are firing shells. They are firing all across. We see a total destruction everywhere. Ukraine has not surrendered. So the war is continuing, or let us say conflict is continuing in Ukraine. In between, Putin also said we will do a denazification of Ukraine. Denazification here means that, as you know, in Ukraine there are several gangs, like these skinheads or the Ku Klux Klan in US, you know, those extreme rightist people. So they are supposed to be. So they suddenly visualize that, you know, in the night they imagine the God saying, you know, you have to go and do whatever. So they wage a war based on those. So what Putin said was we will do denazification, and Zelensky and his team were identified as Nazis by the Russians. Incidentally, Zelensky is a Jew. Putin is also a Jew. Now, two Jews are fighting against Nazification. That is quite interesting. Because the Nazi campaign in Germany at the time was to kill the Jews before the Nuremberg trials, so on. So the other problem with denazification is, supposing if we say that a particular community is dominating Ukraine, how can you really demolish all the Nazis in Ukraine? There is simply no way you can demolish Nazis in Ukraine. It is like fighting terrorists. Terrorism, you can never fight effectively. There is always something or the other happening because terrorism is here and nowhere. It is difficult to. So the denazification campaign of Russia is also a kind of failure, because there's simply no way you can remove the Nazis from the Ukrainian society. There are thousands, billions probably of Nazis or of that. It's an ideology, right? So you can't simply evade. I'm just putting these basics because from here the analysis. So Ukraine asked for the Americans, the NATO, etc. They said they will help Ukraine, but nothing really came forward. What came forward is some material assistance. Germany promised some tanks. Other European countries, they have promised. The other help was provided by accommodating the Ukrainian women and children in Poland mainly, but also in Hungary, Romania, and other places. So that is one. The third is that the American Congress decided a $45 billion aid for Ukrainian efforts. So they also suggested let Zelensky be transported to the European countries. Zelensky said, I will fight within Ukraine, I will not go away from. So this is important for us to understand that there is now a proxy war in Ukraine, like the proxy war in Afghanistan, like the proxy war in Iraq, like the proxy war in Afghanistan, or Exactly, but they have provided $45 billion aid. So with this aid, Zelensky can purchase sophisticated arms, which they already had sent it to Ukraine. Many sophisticated arms have been sent to Ukraine. So it is quite high in terms of the aid, $45 billion that has been sanctioned by the US Congress. And last week they announced $11 more billion. So that's quite huge. Ukrainian budget, defense budget is nowhere in billions. But the aid itself is over nearly $50 to $60 billion. This is only American Congress. We don't know the exact figure of the NATO, how much NATO is transferring, because there is no compilation of all this. Germany announced a $220 billion defense budget, first time after 1945. So $220 billion is the third largest defense budget in the world. After Pentagon, China, it is Germany, which is the third largest defense spender. So how much Germany is transporting to Ukraine is not clear. How much exactly they are giving is not clear. But recently they found the tanks that Germany had given and the guns they have given almost the same as the Russians were using. Because East Germany had these tanks, they now started sending these to Ukraine, which the Russians are still using those tanks and those guns, like the Bofors gun. I'm just giving an example. Like those guns, which have 100 to 200 kilometer range. So the conflict is ongoing. But some lessons that we learned from this is, on March 5th, a Russian general said, we will wind up the war quickly. But we are today in August 24th. Russia used to be a superpower. And Ukraine is never a power, major military power. It was not a major military power, it's a small power. A superpower could not defeat Ukraine so far. That's the most important lesson we learned here in this. 6-7 months, still there is no end in conflict, which means Russia technically is defeated. As a superpower, you cannot control a small power like Ukraine. It means you're not really powerful, right? Number one. Number two, Putin miscalculated. They thought that they will win, but they could not win so. And Finland, Norway have applied for NATO membership. So he was saying no NATO expansion, but on the other hand, NATO is expanding. So he failed, right? Zelensky also failed, because if Zelensky is the leader of Ukraine, he is the leader. As a leader, you have to take care of your people. By all means, you have to, he's saying he will take care, but the thing is, 12 million people have gone away. Most important, many people are killed or property destroyed. What kind of a leader are you if your people are suffering? So strategic leaderships have to be really, there is a just war tradition. In political science, in international relations, we come across this just war tradition. Just war tradition is applied at 3 levels. One is at the statesman level or the leadership level. If you are not sure of winning a war, you should never wage a war. You're not a leader. You're creating so many problems for your people. If you are not sure of winning this war, you should never go to that war. This is just war tradition at the statesman level. And if you want to go to war, you have to exhaust all options, politics, diplomacy, talking to them. You have to exhaust all of these. And then you make the next step, last step of going to a war. The statesman has to be the political leader or the military, whoever is ruling, prime minister, president, who is the real power center. They have to follow this just war tradition. You can't simply go to a war. It's very important in international law, in international organizations, international dynamics. Just war tradition is very important. You can't simply go berserk. A statesman has to be very sure of going to a war. If you're not winning, you should never go to war. Both Putin and Zelensky should not go to war because nothing really happens. 6-7 months in a modern warfare and you can't finish this. Number two, the next level is for the military leadership. The military leadership should protect women and children. They are not combatants. International law says you can never attack civilians, especially women and children. But what happened in Ukraine is women and children were killed. So Putin will have a problem later on of genocide and war crimes. He will 15 years, 20 years, 30 years down the line, both Zelensky and Putin have to respond. Why this has happened? Who is responsible? But also the military leadership should say why they have killed women and children or civilians. We see across on the TV, there are several people who are killed on the roads, right? Because they may have been caught in the crossfire. Whatever reason, but you have no right to kill civilians. There is a separate area. Previously, during Napoleon's time, they used to identify one area for war. And this is away from villages, towns, and other places. So you can never attack. But today, all towns, cities are under siege, under attack, right? The third level is after the war, what should we do with the POWs, prisoners of war? So this is also one area, but we have not reached that level now. The war has not ended. Conflict has not ended. So this third level will be discussed later after we finish the Russia-Ukrainian conflict. Maybe, I do not know when, but so just war traditions are important for all states and under international law. Both violate just war traditions.
What I got from your that still the same thing that America and Russia, their alliance and US alliance and India is still working as a neutral and making relations with the US also and the Russia. Right?
But India had supplied vaccines to Ukraine. India evacuated 20,000 Indians from Ukraine. India had supplied disaster relief for Ukraine. Indian Air Force sorties have gone to Ukraine to supply these food materials and others. So we have done our duty. Nobody supplied vaccines to Ukraine except India. We have done our duty, right?
US is only supporting the ballistic missiles, giving the ballistic missiles and the humanity, the vaccines and the food and
Americans probably are also supplying them. We do not know the idea. What they identified was that $45 billion aid and other things, but we're not very clear what exactly are they supplying. The other things about Russia-Ukrainian war quickly is the narrative. As students, one of the things to take away from Russia-Ukraine war is the narrative. When the initial bombings took place, Russia also almost lost the war, right? Everybody started criticizing Russia. and Russia was not able to, and then sanctions hit Russia. There were the SWIFT system, banking system. SWIFT has been banned for Russian transactions. There was also the other sanctions put up, like the banking institutions or others. So in the initial phases of war, that is February, March, Russia lost the narrative. What it means is, in a next war, next conflict, nations have to be very clear, we have to be very careful on the narrative building. And in this narrative building, just war tradition is important. I have gone to war because I have suffered A, B, C, D. And I have exhausted X, Y, Z options. I have no other goal except to launch a war.
Thank you. Due to time constraint, we cannot accommodate more questions, and we will be happy to share your comments or queries, Professor Srikanth. And with this, we would like to extend our gratitude to Professor Srikanth for speaking to us and enlightening us with your vast knowledge. We look forward to more such interactions in the future. Before we conclude this session, I would like to thank our participants for being a wonderful audience. Small announcement. This event is strictly offline for the students of Galgotias University. And for feedback, I would request you to scan the QR code which is pasted on the walls so that we can have your feedback. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. It's so nice.